So it looks like the consumer is finally winning. The Nvidia RTX 4070 Ti has not really sold at all. I went today, launch day, to my local micro center, and with past GPU launches, you would expect to find nothing in stock. I went a few hours later than the original opening, that was 9 a.m. And of course, often you would have massive lines and the GPUs would be gone immediately, but not today. The RTX 4070 Ti seems to be selling terribly. They still had stacks and stacks of these GPUs there. You could basically get any one that you want. Of course, I mean, they even had a $799 PNY one. Of course, those are going to be less common. It seems like the AIB partners, which they all are, there's no Founders Edition, typically price these GPUs for anywhere from like $850 on up. And they even had the Strix for $1,049. If you guys follow the channel, and you should, and remember to subscribe and smash that like button to help the channel grow, you'll know that recently Best Buy had a discount code that made the 4080, another overpriced GPU, $1,079. So $1,079 to $1,049. For 20 more bucks, you're basically getting a 4080, which is 15 to 25% faster, depending on the game, than the 4070 Ti. So certainly pretty incredible price there. Of course, they still had that one in stock, even though people bought the most expensive 4090s and even some of the 4080s initially. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. It looks like the 4070 Ti, anything above the $799 is not selling at all. I also, if you go online now, I checked on Newegg and Best Buy, they're still in stock. I mean, most of them aren't $799. Most of them are like $839, $869 for the cheaper ones. And of course, everyone that's like $900 and above, including that 1049 Strix, are still available as well. I think Nvidia had an anomaly here with the RTX 4090. That one sold out like as soon as it hit the store shelves pretty much, and it sold out during the first few days everywhere, if not the first few hours, and it continues to be difficult to find. I guess even though it's the most expensive one, it does have the best performance in terms of like the price to performance ratio that you would expect. If people were used to the 3090 already, it only went up $100 and it like doubled the performance of a 3090. So you can justify it that way, but the 4070 Ti went up in price a lot compared to the 3070 Ti. And not only that, even though it does perform really well compared to last generation, I mean, it's supposed to. That's what a new generation GPU should do. It also went up a considerable amount in terms of its price. Now, people compare it to the 3090 Ti. Yes, the 3090 Ti was $1,999, but that quickly became unattainable because nobody bought it. Nvidia discounted it first to like $1,500, then eventually to $1,099, just because people were not buying it. And yes, the 4070 Ti does equal or beat it in many games, even if you take DLSS out of the equation. The only drawback here, you don't have that much VRAM on the 4070 Ti, but still at the end of the day, even though the 4070 Ti is technically cheaper than the 3090 Ti even today, the 3090 Ti is still a much superior GPU. I'm going to give you the reason why. The VRAM, even if you're not going to be using 24 gigabytes for gaming, I don't blame you. Most people don't need that much, but you do need more than 12 gigabytes of VRAM if you're going to be doing 4K gaming, as this 4070 Ti is capable of doing. The 4070 Ti has many decreased specs that may not show up in certain benchmarks, but if you do try to do 4K, the memory, bus, bandwidth, everything, the speed, everything is not good. There are many things on the 4070 Ti under the hood that actually keep it from performing at anywhere near a 3090 Ti in many applications where you're going to have VRAM limitations like the memory bus. So it's really, really limited in that regard. Yes, at 1440p, I think that's the resolution that GPU should be good for. 4K and above, because of the VRAM limitations, I do not think it's a good GPU. And at the end of the day, it's way too expensive for a 1440p GPU. This should be $599 and no more. I mean, ideally, Nvidia should have not even released this. They should have just canned it like they did with the 4080 12GB, and they should have brought out like a 4070. Usually we don't see the Ti variant until later, but Nvidia has made many mistakes with their release schedules, with the pricing and specs of their GPUs, as is indicated by them having to unlaunch the 4080 12GB and make it a 4070 Ti. Now, they probably had a 4070 planned already, which is going to be even worse than this. So they didn't want to make this a 4070, and they figured they're going to release a 4070 Ti first, even though it doesn't really make sense if you look at their previous product stack. Now, the big problem here is a 4070, I mean, is it going to be $499? They may up that price to like $699 now and make it just like they did with the 4070 Ti. And that's definitely going to be a 1440p GPU, and it's really not going to be all that great in terms of its price to performance. So yes, even though Nvidia pointed out that the 4070 Ti can beat the 3090 Ti, if you really look deeper into it, it's not the case entirely, and overall it's a much worse GPU. Nvidia is using DLSS 3, which in my opinion, it does have its moments. It's very good technology that's currently progressing. A lot of people don't like it because they feel like together with frame generation, it's, you know, fake frames, but some of the results in certain games that you don't need really fast latency for, it's definitely pretty good. Like, for example, Flight Simulator, I've mentioned it before. Different games, like I was just playing here, you know, A Plague's Tale Requiem, and you can do DLSS even on quality or something like that, and then put in, you know, frame generation, and it does give you more frames per second. Instead of getting 60 or 70, you're now getting well over 100, and even though you don't notice the visual impact as much, you do notice the nicer frame rate. So it definitely has its uses, but Nvidia has to not use it to lead with the performance of the GPU like they did. And then of course DLSS 3 is going to be superior to the 3090 Ti, because the 3090 Ti cannot currently do DLSS 3.0. It can only do 2, meaning it's not going to get the same uplift that the 4070 Ti does, and it's not going to be useful for everybody. It's only available in a limited number of games, therefore making it a myopic view of the 4070 Ti compared to the 3090 Ti. The 3090 Ti, with its 24 gigabytes of very fast VRAM, can tackle 4K games without any issue at all. Any limitation to its VRAM as far as it can play the game in terms of its frame rates, but then 4070 Ti will face that limitation with half the VRAM and much lower spec as well, with memory bus issues and things like that. So $799 is still too expensive for a 1440p GPU in my opinion. I think at most Nvidia should have done $699 for it, because look, the proof is in the pudding. Nobody is buying it. And then the second big problem, look at all these GPUs here that are 4070 Ti's. You're going to see very few $799 GPUs. Most of them are going to be $850 and above, with some as high as $1,049, which at that point you might as well just get a 4080. I mean, that's such a high price point, and I much rather get a 7900 XTX after the cooler issues are resolved with, you know, the reference model, or maybe get an AIB one, which typically won't have these cooler issues, which may end up being right around the same price. I mean, I got a Power Color XTX Red Devil limited edition for $1,049, and that will absolutely destroy the 4070 Ti basically in anything. Remember, even if you start pulling at ray tracing, AMD has done a pretty good job with ray tracing this generation. It's definitely much better than it was before, and maybe the 7900 XTX is not a 4090, of course, but it at least gets up to the level of a 3090 or 3090 Ti in some cases, which is enough to at least match or beat the 4070 Ti as well, even in ray tracing, which is typically AMD's weaker point compared to Nvidia. But at $1,049, that's a pretty ridiculous price, and most of them people are not buying in the $900 to like $850 range as well. This pricing is definitely an issue that actually goes back to Nvidia. Let's say if they're selling that GPU to the board partners like Asus for way too too expensive of a price, or Gigabyte or MSI, they can't turn around and make any profit on like a $799 4070 Ti. Maybe Nvidia could take a loss on it if they were doing a Founders Edition, but an AIB partner historically has very low margins. Even Gamers Nexus has covered this a lot in the past. They have very low margins on these GPUs. It's a little ironic because the GPUs are more expensive. They're very expensive items to begin with. They have gone up in price, so you would think they have a massive amount of like profit space in there, but the reality is they just don't. They have to pay Nvidia a certain amount for the boards. Then they have to do all of the other things that cost money, like do the coolers, do the testing. When they do testing and it doesn't come out with problems like we've seen with the AMD reference GPUs recently. So there's a lot of cost that goes into that. That's why they may only do a couple at $799 just to show that some are available, and then they're going to try to do a fancy cooler, or factory overclocking is the big thing now, for them to be able to sell these GPUs at a much higher price. For example, there was a Strix at $949 and one at $1049. Is that overclocking really worth $100? Are you ever going to notice it? I mean, there were tests done with the various 4080s that showed the base 1199 ones performed basically just as well, within very minor percentage points, as a more expensive one. If you want to get much more performance, you're much better off saving a little bit more and actually going to a higher class GPU. Like instead of a 4070 Ti, don't get the overclocked one, just go for a 4080. It's going to give you a much bigger type of performance gain than just going within the same model. Doesn't mean the 4080 is a good deal. It just means that it seems like a better deal compared to the more expensive 4070 Ti's. But overall, you see how we're in this bad price mess, because then you start to want to justify different, more expensive price points as making more sense. 4090 is a perfect example. There, at least you're not getting any compromises because it is the most powerful GPU you can buy. And if you can fit that in your budget, you get that and you forget it. But everything else has a lot of considerations to go through. And then it makes sense that the board partners are trying to tack on an extra $100 to $200 or a little more on each GPU by offering overclocking and better coolers, or at least fancier coolers. That way they can at least make a little bit more of a profit margin in each GPU. It ends up being bad for the consumer because then you're paying hundreds of dollars more for a GPU that should have had at least a base MSRP of $799, which many already, including myself, consider to be overpriced to begin with by at least $100 to $200. So the problem here is Nvidia is going to have to lower these prices. Look what happened with the AMD Ryzen 7000 CPU launch. Nobody bought them on launch day. I went on launch day and basically like a handful of people bought them. They stayed in stock. Within that first week, they had to start running the special that you get free RAM and you get the CPU, and they discounted the RAM. Even today, the special is still there. You can get a 7600X with 16 gigabytes of DDR5, and it's like $238 for both. You're getting the free RAM. That's like an amazing price. And then a 7700X is like $347 or something like that, and you get 32 gigabytes of VRAM for free, plus the CPU. I mean, just that RAM costs nearly like $200, so you're getting a really heavily discounted CPU. Why? Nobody bought it at its much more expensive MSRP price, so they had to not only discount it, but throw in free RAM as well. You can see the discount may also apply on Amazon and different places like that. And Micro Center is the only one that had that free RAM, but they want to get rid of these CPUs because nobody's buying them. That's going to bring back with the Nvidia 4070 Ti and 4080. If nobody's buying them, Nvidia is going to have to eventually reduce the price that they sell their boards to the AIBs to, so that in turn they can reduce their pricing as well. Or they may start including games when you buy GPUs. Remember that? GPUs used to have free games. You would buy it and then they would give you a couple of free games. They only do that now when they're trying to get rid of old stock and inventory, like Nvidia and AMD will give you some nice games sometimes for like older GPUs, but new ones do not come with that. They may change. They may start offering free games. They may start offering various other discounts when you buy one of these GPUs. GPUs because they're not selling. And to go back to the beginning of the video, that's why the consumer is slowly starting to win. It's a little bit weird when an expensive GPU comes out that's overpriced, nobody buys it and people complain. Very valid. When a really well-priced GPU comes out, let's say a 3080 at $699, or something people can agree that was a good price to performance, a 1080 Ti, for example, at $699, and then everybody buys it. The companies see the overwhelming demand for that particular product at that price. In the next generation, they just raise the price again, like they did with the 2080 Ti compared to the 1080 Ti. So even if Nvidia gives us a 4070 Ti at $599 and it sells like hotcakes, all they're going to think is, we're not going to do that again because it's so too easy. We're going to make it $799. Unfortunately, it's not going to work for them now, and people are upset. So maybe that's just the cycle. One generation of GPU is expensive, the next maybe goes down in price again, and then it goes up in price and then down. Maybe that's just what we're going to have to see happen here, and maybe we have to wait until RTX 5000 to see a like 5070 Ti or a 5080 that's priced reasonably well again, because Nvidia learned their lesson, at least for that one generation. And then the 6080 may go right back up to these absurd prices. That's at least better than having everything just go up perpetually. At least you have a chance every other generation at something that's a good price to performance. Once again, technology is always improving, so you expect to maybe have to pay not as much and get a lot of performance, or else we'd all have to have like $1 million computer that's the size of a house. So hopefully this is getting better for the consumer. Let me know down below what you think of this 4070 Ti launch, or if you actually know somebody who bought one. So far, I haven't found too many people. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.